Good evening to everyone. Let us start the session by chanting Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samha sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samha sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samha sambuddhassa. We are today hoping to discuss a sutta which lays way to the limbs of awakening. Within the study of the doctrine, within the study of both the Abhidhamma and of course the sutras as we are doing today, one might understand that although the sutras give us the data, the knowledge, the wisdom, or lay foundation to the wisdom that we require to attain certain achievements of sainthood, we also do require a sort of motivation to walk upon the path of Dhamma. Sometimes this motivation could be the knowledge over how samsara, the cycle of rebirth and death, occurs. Sometimes motivation could be death. Sometimes the motivation could be the natures of impermanence or suffering or non-self, or maybe all three of them. But sometimes, or usually, before all of these sorts of wisdom that arises in our mind, for most of us, it is the inspiration that we derive from the teachings or from the teacher that actually guides us upon this path, that actually guides us along this path, which gives us the inspiration that we require, which will enable us to sort of walk the path of Dhamma as the Buddha taught and intended for us to walk on it. So today, we have taken the sutta on Sakuludayi, right? On Sakuludayi as the sutta or the topic of discussion, right? Now, this sutta is a sutta which emphasizes on the reason by which the Buddha was so revered during his time of existence when he was alive, as compared to the other teachers who were of the time. The other teachers who were of the time. It is very understandable as we have gone through a number of suttas. As we have gone through a number of suttas, it is very much understandable that the Buddha appeared or was born into the world at a time where there was much great inquiry into spiritual sainthood, spiritual achievements and attainments. So there were a lot of schools of different teachers who were teaching different ways by which one should achieve and attain, of how one could achieve and attain something which is blissful. Maybe using the word nirvana would be a little bit of an overstatement, but they knew or had an idea that bliss was with God or the Mahabrahma, and through which many of these teachers were teaching many paths leading to that said level of peace or unity with the Brahma, right? Unity with the Brahma. While some teachers took up positions where they would teach their ascetic hermits or the wanderers different types of meditation pertaining to the Rupa and the Arupa plane, there were also some other heretic teachers who would speak about a path leading to a state of bliss, beginning from excruciating morality practices, right? From starving oneself, from behaving somewhat, taking up positions, postures, and behaviors, imitating behaviors of animals and different other creatures. There were various practices. There were also practices where one would try to connect with the stars, one would try to eat the sun, live off the sunlight. There were various practices. And as we dwell into this sutta, we realize that all of these, that there was a paramount amount of motivation within the population that the Buddha was living with during the time in India. People were desperately looking for a spiritual leader, spiritual path, a spiritual leader, spiritual path that they could really depend on. And as we study through the sutta today, one could also realize the amount of frustration which was apparent in the time. And reading the sutta today, I personally feel that we do not live in very different times, that we are also currently facing somewhat of a dilemma almost sometimes with regard to what the teaching truly is sometimes, with the opinions that are existent all across the world, right? With regard to what peace, nirvana, enlightenment, this achievement of sainthood, all of these things. So going down to the facts mentioned within this sutta, why I thought this sutta is important, is it gives us the point of respect, or the point where our attitude should be, how we look at the teacher and the teachings, which allows one to form a strong foundation to keep on to one's practice and to sort of persevere on, right? Now, let's get down to the sutta, right? So if we skip all the way down to the main text, right? Skip all the way down to the main text. The main text starts from page number 200. Page number 200. For those of you who do not have the handout, sometimes as you keep on listening, you might sometimes get confused with certain points that are mentioned, because the order that we are actually following is the order within the handout, or rather the sutta. The edition of the sutta that we usually select, or rather I usually select, is Pyathan's translation, which I find very enlightening and very much touching upon, or written from the aspect of a rather practitioner than a scholar almost. But I think Pyathan's work is it intimately comes to the border of both academics and practice. So that's why I personally select these translations. If you feel by any chance that these translations are a little bit difficult for you personally, you could, of course, there are many other websites, there are many other references, translations that you could refer to. Right? This is my personal like in this particular translation. So page number 200. We come across an event where, now from the first paragraph, I think there's something to learn, right? Now let us look at the first paragraph. What does it explain? It talks about an event where the Buddha, while residing in the squirrel's feeding ground, the bamboo grove, Veluvana Viharaya, that we call in Pali, right? He gets up in the morning, right? He gets up in the morning and he sort of wanders into, or rather goes into, or nears the town for alms. He nears the town for alms. And whilst approaching the town, he thinks to himself, it is a bit too early. I think we came across another sutta where the monks thought that they were a bit too early and they sort of decided that they will go chill at the nearby park. And for me, this is absolutely beautiful because you realize that sort of the nature of the Buddha. From one part, we would with the sort of the, for example, the culture that we come from, being born, to most of us being born into sort of Buddhist countries, right? The culture that we come from, we always idolize the Buddha as this omniscient one. But then when you read into this, you find, oh, the Buddha is actually quite chill. he he dresses himself in the morning. He prepares himself, dons his robe, takes his alms bowl, and he starts walking to town. And he thinks, oh, it's a bit too early. I will go spend some time in the peacock's feeding ground. And he walks over to the peacock's feeding ground. And to me, that's the most human thing that we could expect out of the Buddha, right? And this, I think, speaks 1,000 words as to why the Buddha was such a enlightened, peaceful, right? Not at all rigid human being, or rather a being, rather, right? Compared to the sort of omniscient image we have of him. Of course, he does have that part, the omniscient part, the serious, the Dhamma teaching mode, but also you see a very relaxed mode to the Buddha as well. And to me, that's a very, very, very important thing, because that allows me to see the Buddha in myself in a way, right? To sort of relate to the Buddha, not in any way. Now, please don't understand, I am not, right? Uh, saying of any sort of attainment. No, not at all. But in the way the Mahayana tradition puts it, the Buddha nature, right? The seeing of the Buddha nature. I think now the Buddha nature is spoken of even within the Thai tradition, but we find it very much spoken very much in sort of Japanese Mahayana Buddhism, where they speak a lot about Buddha nature. And this seeing of this Buddha nature, which is the nature of enlightenment, mind you, it allows me to see potential within myself to achieve such states, seeing that the Buddha, the Arahants, were living in this sort of a very relaxed sort of peace of mind. So relaxed, the Buddha being such a prominent leader. Now, as we go down to the sutta, we find that Sakuludayi, the wanderer, having is experience or is in the midst of a bit of chit chat, right? Chit chat of nothing to do with the Dhamma, right? Nothing to do with the Dhamma. When that is the second point that I notice within this sutta, right? The second point, the Buddha now realizing, also understanding that these sutras have been repeated by Venerable Ananda, which have then been interpreted into the books and written down where we receive the tradition of Theravada, the written texts, are the words of Venerable Ananda. Now, for the Buddha, whilst he's repeating these occasions, now, of course, each sutta does not say, about the account of Venerable Ananda being taught, but it said, thus have I heard. Thus have I heard, which means, with the commentary expounds, saying, these are the words spoken by Venerable Ananda, repeated, taught to him by the Buddha himself. Because again, that was apparently one of the conditions Ananda placed upon the Buddha upon accepting the role of being his attendant, that all the Dhamma which is taught in his absence must be reported, or rather taught back to Venerable Ananda. So he carries this Dhamma, with him for the benefit of the disciples, the other disciples, and now for the benefit of us, right? We find the Buddha making a very distinct note of the behavior that he sees within the peacock's grove. What is that? That they are talking about something which does not end in enlightenment, right? That they are talking about something which does not end or end up or lead to the practice leading towards enlightenment. Now, why is this sort of a statement made? Because we understand the time again. The hermits, the wanderers, the spiritual caste of the time, with the inclination that they had. Now, there were lay people. It was not only wanderers, there were other lay people also with these people, right? With Sakuludayi, the wanderer, right? Yet they were making. Now, what is the account that we see in page number 201? We see, then the Blessed One went to the Wanderer's Park in the peacock's feeding ground. Now, at the time, the wanderer Sakuludayi was sitting with a large crowd of wanderers, all talking loudly, shouting, making loud noises, and indulging in various low talk. This is to say, talk about kings, robbers, ministers of state, about armies, dangers, and war. Sounds sounds quite similar to every other temple in London. I had to say it, excuse me. Right? Talking about kings, robbers, ministers of state, about armies, dangers, wars, and food and drink. About clothing, beds, furniture, garlands, scents, relatives. He goes, now look at this, right? Now try to understand the sutta, right? In a way, the attitude by which, now what is a sense, if I may ask? What is a sense of repeating each and every topic that was discussed? This is the Buddha's humor. Right? This is the Buddha's humor in a way that is going on in great detail as to the low contents of the discussion. The low contents of the discussion. This also speaks a lot about the standard of teaching, learning, and practice during the time of the Buddha compared to most of the other wanderers. This would then, it could be said that there was a greater amount of persistence in training and practice within the teachings of Gautama Buddha compared to many of the other wanderers and teachers of the time. And as we go down within, or sort of read through the sutta, I think this point becomes even more evident. Also, now these wanderers, heretical teachers, gurus, swamis, these monastic clergy practitioners of the time, they were not enlightened beings. Some of them had absorptions, deep absorptions, yes, but most of them did not even have that sort of absorption. Some of the teachers of the time, after the Buddha's arising, there were teachers who even lost their attainments and achievements. Because why? They found that there was a great movement within the time, within the area that they were living in. that they were moving, that there was a great following being built by this person who was known as the Buddha. You might remember even Venerable Sariputta's and Moggallahana's previous teacher, how his reaction was to Sariputta and Moggallana moving from his pupillage to under the Buddha as the Buddha's disciples. Right? What was the reply which was said? How can I, Sariputta? I have a great following. They are depending on me. How can I go under being a great teacher? How can I go under and live under another teacher? Right? You understand a sense of insecurity that arose within the other teachers when the Buddha was around. With that amount of insecurity, you also find that the teachers did not have any base or reason or even the ability of mind to reject the Buddha. Now we find within the Peacock's Feeding Ground in page 201, we find that the Buddha, seeing this gathering, this large gathering of Sakuludayi and his other wanderers, talking and engage with all of these discussions, when they see the Buddha, they stop talking. They stop talking. Why? Because Sakuludayi, good sirs, be quiet, please. Good sirs, be quiet, please. Don't make noise, good sirs. The Recluse Gautama is approaching. Right? The Recluse Gautama is approaching. Now, this is not even their teacher here. This is not even their teacher. But you find the sense of respect that the Buddha commanded at the time. This was, for some, this was a feeling of like a cold shower on a very hot day, something so pleasant, cooling to the mind and body. But for some others, even within the Sangha of the Buddha, for some others, this was like being sort of strangled almost, because there was such an amount of leadership of the Buddha. We see this display, or we see the stress within the Sangha coming out on the day of the Buddha's demise very clearly. On the day of the Buddha's demise, the abhadda words or the unsuitable words of Subhadda may sometimes ring a bell to you. What did this one monk do when the Arahants were seated in contemplation, and when the unenlightened bhikkhus were wailing and moaning and crying, suffering the demise of the Buddha? This monk got up and he was like, why are you crying? The Buddha is dead. We are finally free. We can finally relax. This Subhadda says. This speaks 1,000 or 1,000 more words about the strong leadership the Buddha had and how that leadership kept everyone in check and line. This amount of leadership cannot be displayed by a normal human being, of course, because it speaks specifically. The Buddha knew the minds of his disciples. The Buddha knew the minds of the disciples. The lay people came, the deities came, the queens, the kings, they came with a lot of money. They came with a lot of materialistic benefit for the Sangha, right? They offered monasteries, they offered parks, they offered everything that they possibly could buy at the time. Yet, it is very clear that the Buddha's prime objective was not the lay people specifically, but it was more the Sangha. The Sangha was the Buddha's main priority, because the Buddha was literally in each and every person's mind. In many suttas, we discover moments where The Buddha suddenly appears in front of a bhikkhu when an unwholesome thought, a thought of unwholesome nature, arises in the bhikkhu's mind or the monk's mind. The Buddha appears and he teaches Dhamma, allowing that specific monk or allowing the disciple to get back into the practice, if not achieve enlightenment. This is the amount of strong leadership that we also require at this moment, which I think we are putting aside in many ways. Whilst the Buddha taught, preached the importance of impermanence, understanding the nature of impermanent suffering and non-self, the Buddha did not allow for a lackadaisical attitude to arise within the Sangha just because phenomena was impermanent. The nature of impermanent suffering and non-self was used primarily to shift the pattern of thinking within a person, but the Buddha also recognized that living in the world requires discipline, sila, requires a leader, a teacher who could support like a mother, like a father, support the practice of one's disciples. This talks a lot about the necessity of the Buddha, of such a teacher within our hearts. That is why every time that we do practice meditation, it is unavoidable that we sometimes fail. But although we do fail, what picks us, the energy that helps us to get back up, would be the wisdom that is offered through the Dhamma and the wisdom that arises through the most important, the Buddha, right? The Buddha. Now, going down, moving on, right? The Buddha asked Sakuludayi, right? The Buddha asked Sakuludayi what they were talking about, right? And you find that Sakuludayi somewhat tries to avoid, right? That Sakuludayi somewhat attempts to avoid telling the complete truth, but he somehow negates it, not negates, but rather maneuvers his reply in a way that he generalizes, that he generalizes what they were talking about and says kings and queens and all of these things, right? This again speaks about, it is said in the Lakkana Sutta, it is said in the Lakkana Sutta that the Buddha cannot be lied to, right? That the Buddha cannot be lied to. This is in one way because of the respect the Buddha commands as a spiritual teacher, and also as a result of his perfections, it is said. As a result of his perfections that the Buddha has developed in the past during his time of practice, right? And we see that Sakuludayi, in his reply, he attempts to somewhat maneuver the discussion in a way where he doesn't have to completely say that they were talking of some rootless thing that would not benefit anyone, but rather turned it into a more decent way of addressing the Buddha, right? Now arises Sakuludayi's question, right? Page number 203. Now Sakuludayi, his question to the Buddha remains, his question to the Buddha remains to be, there are many teachers, right? And these teachers all being well known, right? Being the head of an order, head of a congregation, well known, famous Ford maker regarded as good by the masses who has come to Rajga. So all of these teachers, right? All of these teachers respect, revere, the Buddha for him being the religious teacher that he is, right? We find an account where the Lord, the Buddha, receives the respect of all of these teachers. Now, this respect, what he puts in here is more an idea of where the Buddha during this time, very fast, due to the place that he was born to as a prince, the way that he achieved enlightenment as the Buddha, having gone through the training or under other teachers, and the position that he found himself after the achievement or attainment of enlightenment has somewhat pushed or placed the Buddha in a position where the other teachers were somewhat unable to challenge, were somewhat unable to challenge. Now, this is why specifically it is said that all Buddhas, before their last birth, determines or decides on a high birth to be born into, a high caste, a clan, and a high birth with money, wealth, power, and influence. This is said to be one of the great determinations of a bodhisattva or an aspirant of Buddhahood, because it makes the whole process of enlightening the masses easier, of enlightening the masses easier. It takes away a very, very important, it takes away a very, very crucial element of discrimination which could be brought about the Buddha, which could also affect the quality of his teachings had he been born to a low caste, as according to the caste systems of the time. As according to the caste systems of the time. Moving onwards, the 6 teachers conned by their own disciples. Now you find the words of Purana Kassapa, Makkali Gosala, Ajita Kesa Kambala, Pakudda Kachayana, and Sanjay Bellatti Putta. Now these were the 5 heretical teachers who were somewhat the most popular players in the game of enlightenment, if I may put it in that way, right? We also find, as the Buddha being being respected and being revered by almost all of these teachers, well known to the 4 corners of India, and through the merchants, we even find there was a research done by Cambridge, one of the Sri Lankan gentlemen at Cambridge University, where his research was on the effect the Buddha had upon trade of the world. Very interesting piece of research he had done. And he had discovered that there were coins in Egypt, right, during the time of the Buddha's reign, where the coins had images of the Buddha upon them, right? This was a research done by this chap. He presented it in one of the seminars that I attended in Burma, right? And he had discovered that there were these Buddhist meditative postures that he refers to as the Buddha himself upon the coins and medallions, ancient coins and medallions found in Egypt during the time parallel to the time of the Buddha's reign, right? So you would see that the Buddha was very, very respected. And this respect that we understand of the Buddha being such a great teacher, right? Being such a marvelous teacher, right? That also supports the achievement of stream entry, right? That also supports the achievement of stream entry, right? This is something that we have to feel in terms of respect, because it is because of this respect that many of the bhikkhus, the Sangha, did not transgress most of the rules, because of the respect they had towards the teachings and the Buddha. This respect that we have spoken about again and again, the importance of respect within the practice, spreads far beyond just the practice, spreads far beyond just the practice, and spreads far beyond just the practice, even into our socio-economic values, right? The five heretical teachers and also Nigantha Putta, he says, now look at this. Once, page number 204, once Nigantha Putta was teaching his Dhamma to an assembly of 700. There, a certain disciple of Nigantha Putta made a noise and said, Sirs, do not ask Nigantha Putta about that matter. He does not know it. I know it. Ask us about the matter. We can explain that to you, sir. What amount of disrespect, right? What amount of disrespect do you find here? Now, this is a disciple of Nigantha Putta himself, right? Nigantha Putta himself. Once, Nigantha Putta stretched out his arm, but failed even when he was wailing. Be quiet, sirs, make no noise. They are not asking you, sirs, they are asking us. We will answer them. Now, this shows the difference between the teachings or the followers of the Buddha and the rest. Now, Nigantha Putta, compared to the rest of the heretical teachers, was in a much higher, more senior position as well. I think even now, if one is to travel in India, one finds a lot of statues with regards to Nigantha Putta all around. Niganthas, even up to today, there are people who dwell naked as followers of Nigantha, the Niganthas, up until today. So it had a great, we don't find followers of Makkali, Gosal, and all of these people. We find Niganthas, right? You could then say how much of power, influence that Nigantha Putta had upon the spiritual realms of the day, right? Now, it is even to such a teacher of such a caliber, we find that there is this monk directly in front of his, in Nigantha's presence, disqualifying him and asserting that the disciple knows better, right? That the disciple knows better. That's a lot of guts. That's a lot of guts. But many of Nigantha Putta's disciples, having refuted him, left saying, you do not understand the doctrine and discipline. I understand that. Now the disciples to Nigantha's face, right, disreputes the teacher, right, and says that the teacher does not have consistency, that the teacher has failed, and that the disciples knows better, right? Then goes on to the Buddha. It is this Recluse Gautama, the head of an order, head of a group, a congregation leader, well known, famous, right? Going about, Nigantha says, but your disciples, they respect you. Not only your disciples, but even other heretical teachers and the disciples under them also respect you. And uses a beautiful example, right? Uses a beautiful example. Like a person standing in a main road, a junction, right? With many people waiting to buy some honey, waits until the honeycombs are cut, right? Now, if you just imagine this example, just imagine it, just illustrate it in your mind, right? When the honeycomb is cut, the juiciness of the honey oozing out, you know, and how one would sort of salivate almost with the visual of the honey sort of oozing out, right? And that is the example Sakuludayi uses to explain the situation of where the disciples are yearning for a bit of Dhamma, a drop of Dhamma. You can imagine the amount of respect that the Buddha received and also the respect that the Dhamma receives, right? That the Buddha receives as well as the Dhamma received during the time. And I think that example is absolutely beautiful, right? Because it is absolutely in that way, the Dhamma brings us a sense of relief, sweet relief, right? Sweet release in a way that the savory, sort of rough flavors inflicting the palate are sort of quenched and sort of is sweetened by the Dhamma almost, you know. And it is, I think, it's a very beautiful, viable example to sort of use to refer to what the Dhamma is. So him using that expression itself, you would see that even Sakuludayi, although he is not a follower of the Buddha, yet the impression he has of the teachings of the Buddha and the Buddha himself, right? Just imagine the impression that the Sangha, the Buddha's own community, had upon the Buddha, right? Had upon the Buddha, right? Good. Then Sakuludayi's five qualities, page 205, right? Uday, how many now Uday, right? Now he refers to the word Uday. Remember that there were about five Uday. There were actually five Udayis in the doctrine, right? Uday is a very famous chap because there is a Uday who gains most of his reputation for his transgressors, which are all mentioned in very gruesome detail in the Vinaya Pitaka, in the basket of conduct, right? But that Uday is not this Uday, right? There are five Udayis, right? And this Uday is very different from that Uday. Please make a note of that, right? Uday, how many qualities do you see in me on account of which my disciples revere, respect, esteem, and honor me? Right? Then he says, Bhante, I see five qualities in the Blessed One, on account of which the Blessed One's disciples revere, esteem, respect, esteem, and honor him. Right? What are the five? The first, Bhante, the Blessed One takes little food and speaks in praise of little food. Right? Bhante, the Blessed One takes little food and speaks in praise of little food. Now, what does this mean? Right? As we go through the Blessed One, the second reason he says, the Blessed One is contented with any kind of robe and speaks in praise of contentment with any kind of robe. The Blessed One is contented with any kind of alms food and speaks in praise of contentment with any kind of alms food. The Blessed One is contented with any kind of lodging and speaks in praise of contentment with any kind of lodging. The Blessed One is solitary and speaks in praise of solitude. Now, if we are to dwell into understanding what exactly Sakuludayi is going on about here, right? And the attitude that he seems to be having with regards to what is respectable, right? You find a clear depiction of the Buddha's wisdom, and then the wisdom that existed during the time. I have mentioned in classes before that the Buddha, when it came to, when it came down to the teachings, when he first started teaching, it took the world by storm and shock. He was quite a controversial character. Why? Because in a world where the heretics, in a world where the gurus were teaching about impermanence, bliss, and self, he brought in a doctrine completely different to that: impermanence, suffering, and non self. Right? Here you find, when the great teacher asks, what are the best qualities that you see in me that you think that I am more respected and revered and all of that by my disciples? When the disciples, as you have mentioned, of other heretics and teachers do not respect them in the same way that I am respected by mine, right? And the best examples that this Sakuludayi could come up with are examples all about food, robes, arms, food, lodging, and solitude. Take away the solitude, all of this is about material. Solitude might seem like he's talking about the mind, but he's actually talking about being alone. That too is something which is material, right? Being physically away and alone. Being physically away and alone. He's talking now, that is where the mind of a person who has not known the Dhamma lies. Materials. Who has not known the Dhamma. We judge, through the things that we see in the outside world, but the Buddha gives us all a slap, I think, right? Gives us all a knock on the head. Now look, suppose Uday, on account of that fact, the recluse Gautama takes little food, speaks in praise of little food. My disciples were to revere, respect, esteem, and honor me, right? But Uday, there are disciples of mine who take only a cupful or only half a cup or a bilva. I don't know what a bilva fruit is, right? I don't know what a bilva fruit is. Or half a bilva fruit. What is a bilva fruit? Okay, a wood apple. A wood apple, right? Wood apple. Wood apple is specifically mentioned in a lot of suttas. I think it was a favorite of the time, right? It is actually mentioned in a lot of suttas, right? Probably with the heat also, the wood apples might have been quite good as well because of the heat. So now, very interesting little gems that we find. All right. So the Buddha says, now look, there are disciples of mine who take lesser food than I do, right? Who take lesser food than I do. Then the robe. There are bhikkhus who wear dust heap robes, wear coarse robes, who collect rags from the charnel grounds or refuse dumps or shops and making an upper robe with them, wear them. Now, you might sometimes think that there are no longer monks like this, but actually, there are um, monks like this who still would sort of only wear the robes which have been used to cover dead bodies, robes that have been made, usually robes that have been sort of given to them, and they sort of have at the time of ordination, and they would have this robe and they will sort of wear it. And when it tears, they would patch it up with other different types of cloth, right? Other different types of cloth. This is to this is very much practiced even today, although we do see it quite rarely. It is still practiced. Suppose, Uday, on account of the fact that the recluse Gautama is contented by any kind of robe, there are people, there are disciples of mine who wear lesser. If, Uday, I am contented with any kind of food, there are disciples of mine who are alms food eaters. Alms food eaters is one of the austeric practices where you do not eat anything other than what you get from alms food that you go into town for, right? Then who walk the unbroken arms round from house to house. The unbroken arms round from house to house is another austeric practice. In Pali, we call this Dutanga, right? Which are austeric practices, right? And goes from unbroken arms is when you cannot avoid one house. Now, for example, let us say that there are 10 houses down a specific road, and there are one or two houses that are not Buddhist and are actually also a bit toxic in a way that they shout at you or they are rude to you, but you cannot avoid that house. You must also go to that house for alms, right? And wait until for a amount of time until you can sort of move on to the other house. You are absolutely sure that you will not receive anything, right? Until you are sure that you do not receive anything, right? And then who delights in the rounds of food gleanings, right? Yeah, food gleanings is what is again alms food. Having entered amongst houses in inhabited areas, they will not consent to sitting down even when invited. They will not sit down to eat at an outside place, even if invited. They will only come back, right? They will only eat coming back to their aranya or the monastery or their abiding. Now, this is found as a later sort of practice, not an early practice, but a later practice uh, that they had developed, right? But Ayuda sometimes eat imitation meals of rice, free of black specks and all of this. Now, meaning black specks means a higher quality of rice, right? I eat better. I eat more luxurious forms of meals compared to my disciples. So that is also not the reason that I have been respected, right? The recluse Gautami is contended with any kind of logic, right? But then there are my disciples who are food dwellers, open air dwellers, or dwellers without the roof for 8 months of the year. Now, these are all austeric practices, right? There are all austeric practices, right? As I remember, I can't remember I think it was Venerable Moneya, who was the monk who practiced all 13 Dhutangas or austeric practices, right? The only monk in the Buddha Sasana, there is usually only one, and he practices, and their lifespans are also quite short because they live such an austeric life, but they are enlightened, right? They are enlightened. Now, even at a time where I remember it as Venerable Monet, uh, I might just be wrong. Okay. The name will come, but there was only one monk for sure, right? I can't remember whether his name was Venerable Monet. Now, venerable, this specific venerable, at one occasion when the Buddha was near the forest that he was residing, and the Buddha came with a retinue of monks. Obviously, there were people who would walk, follow the Buddha to every place that the Buddha went. He was such a great teacher. And in the Buddha sort of traveling, um, venerable the monk who was the only monk who practiced all the austeric tendencies, he did not. When he saw the Buddha coming, he went away, right? He did not come to see the Buddha, right? Now the other monks got to know that this venerable was nearby, but having heard about this, that the venerable sort of went away, he went away from this retinue of monks and the Buddha. Now, to some of you, or even surely it was a question even to the bhikkhus of the time and the followers of the time, why didn't this monk, it is such a rare occasion that the Buddha would come right to your doorstep, why didn't this monk come out and pay respect? Right? Pay respect. And then the Buddha's reply and answer was, he is a person who takes pleasure in seclusion. He has taken use of what I have to offer him. He has achieved enlightenment, right? He has achieved enlightenment. Now, even occasions such as that says a lot about the teacher. It is as if the loving kindness, the gladness, the compassion, and the upekkha, or the equanimity that the Buddha uses the example of unconditional love towards from a parent towards one's children. It is almost that depiction here. The Buddha is not frazzled or taken up by the fact that this venerable did not come to worship him or pay respects. He understood for himself. He has done what he had to do. He took and used Dhamma for what he wanted to use the Dhamma for. There is no other reason, right? And you understand the sense of attraction or the foundation of Dhamma these people or the Dhamma focuses on. It does not seem to have any connection, right, to the sort of ritualistic good habits or observances. It all came down to what is right for your enlightenment. What is right for your enlightenment. All the rest seems to have just been practices of the time, but those which could have easily been avoided should it cause any disturbance to your enlightenment in any way, right? To your enlightenment in any way. Moving forward, then we have the Recluse Gautama is solitary and speaks in praise of solitude. But Udayi, these are the disciples who are forest dwellers, so he says this, right? So the Buddha says, Udayi, if these are the reasons you think that I am respected, there are my disciples who do better or more austeric practices. So these are not the reasons the Tathagata, the Buddha, the omniscient one is respected. The reasons the Buddha is respected is, now we come to the juice, right? The reason the Buddha is respected is, one, for his higher moral virtue, right? For the Buddha's higher moral virtue. Now, these are, in a way, the factors of Buddhanusati, right? The way that one, or the focuses that one could have even in one's Buddhanusati, or the contemplation of the Buddha's qualities. These are things that one could focus upon. These are things that one could focus upon. Here, Uday, my disciples esteem higher moral virtue. Esteem higher moral virtue. Now, esteem higher moral virtue is the disciples who are in a path towards Nibbana have a high esteem and respect for those have a respect for higher virtues seen in another. Seen in another. Because of this, because of this, because of this, what happens is, now, when one is a trainee in the path, right? A trainee in the path, we speak about the qualities of faith that develops within one, which enables one to achieve enlightenment. The qualities available within one to achieve enlightenment. And one of those qualities is the sealer, right? The sealer. But here we find the word Adhi-sealer, A-D-H-I, sealer. Adhi-sealer is a great esteem for a higher amount of virtue. Now, Adhi-sealer is referring to now the Buddha himself, right? The Buddha himself. So the one's attraction to this higher sealer, not having your sealer broken, pierced, bent, or injured in any way, having a pristine amount of sila brings a strength to heart for the meditation and all of that, but moreover, creates a great amount of respect towards the practice. A great amount of respect towards the practice, right? That is what is mentioned now within the first quality that the Buddha says that he is respected for, the higher virtue, right? The second we have, right, the jnana darsana, the knowledge and vision. The knowledge and vision, now the knowledge and vision would include the Buddha's achievements of direct knowledge, cause and effect, and the wonders that he is able to procure, right? The direct knowledge, the knowing the knowledge of cause and effect, and the wonders that he is able to procure from his mental achievements of samadhi, right? Through his mental achievements of samadhi. What a great inspiration he would have been. I mean, to have a teacher who could perform the twin miracles as such, who would be able, who you would see advising deities, men, kings, queens, and all of them loving him to the depths of their existence. What a teacher and inspiration the Buddha would have been to the time, right? It is almost in awe that you sometimes, if you imagine the instances and put it into visualization, you would be in awe. I think all of us would be in awe of how majestic of a teacher the Buddha really was. How majestic of a teacher the Buddha really was. There are certain suttas which talks about instances where 7 kingdoms all together enter into robes and becomes abides by the path of practice. 7 kingdoms all together, right? Of course, when it says 7 kingdoms all together, I'm sure there were people left behind, but at least the babies and the children, but it speaks greatly about a majority of the population coming into Dhamma and taking up the discipline the discipline leading to the achievement of Nibbana, right? And then we have, right? Then we have a higher wisdom, Adipanya. Now, the knowledge of higher wisdom, the ability of one's higher wisdom, what is this higher wisdom? The higher wisdom is a Dhamma which allows one to let go of the cankers, the floods, the ogres, all the impediments and imperfections of one's existence and achieve enlightenment. The wisdom that leads or takes or enables one to get rid of all the disturbances in one's mind, enabling a person to penetrate into deeper understanding, ending in Nibbana. That is the wisdom that is talked about here. And we know that it is the Buddha who was the one who taught this path, who taught this practice of achieving Nibbana to the whole entire human realm and other planes of existence, right? Human realm and other planes of existence. This higher wisdom, this higher wisdom is a respect that one has towards Nibbana itself. And even now you see a connection between Nibbana and the Buddha, the inspiration that is gained through the Buddha embodying Nibbana and the wisdom that is taught by the Buddha, which recognizes Nibbana itself again. So you see a sort of connection between Nibbana, the practice, and the Buddha, right? And the Buddha. The fourth is the Four Noble Truths, the Chatu Arya Satcha. The Four Noble Truths. The first one, the noble truth of suffering. The second, the noble truth that is the arising of suffering. The third, the ending of suffering. And the fourth, the path leading to the ending of suffering. All the doctrines, all the evaluations that we read within the Dhamma can be sort of taught within or with these four sentences or points. The Eightfold Noble Path. That is how sometimes people find it um, incredibly fascinating that we are able to connect each and every part of our Dhamma together, or that it almost makes it feel as the Dhamma is limitless, right? But that is because I think now personally, you might of course say I have a biased opinion, but say what you want. Obviously, I'm a monk, but in sort of recognizing that the the Dhamma is pristine and makes sense in a way that you are able to connect parts of it from anywhere, because it is so well taught. It makes sense. It makes practical sense to a person who has read and understood it, right? Makes a lot of practical sense to a person who has read and understood it. And this, the suffering, the rising of suffering, the ending of suffering, and the path leading to that, the way leading to the ending of suffering, is what gave the Buddha everything, the respect and all of that, and also enabled the Buddha to sort of discover it through his perfections, the practices or the bodhisattva values or the perfections of the paramis. The fifth is the Buddha's the path of awakening, the four focuses of mindfulness, that is the satipatthana. These are the reasons now yourself you find yourself being taught the most important aspects of Dhamma. Now we don't come across anything which is material. We come across everything that is completely connected to the achievement of Dhamma and what aids in that achievement of Dhamma, nothing material. So that is what again allows us devoid now. We are in isolation, we are in self isolation. However, I find that in this time a lot of people have come into a realization that you do not need to specifically go on a retreat or specifically have to go into monastic institution to practice. I think in that way we have benefited from self isolation because we have taught ourselves that this practice is very much a practice that can be integrated into our personal lives at home, which sometimes with otherwise we may not have had the motivation to do all the things that we are doing currently, right? To have the motivation to do the things that we have been doing currently. Now with these, then we have the satipatthanas. Then we have the satipatthanas, and then goes on the path to awakening going on. Now it comes to the limbs of awakening, right? To the limbs of awakening. Now these seven factors, right? The seven awakening factors allows, allows for Nibbana to be achieved. Allows for Nibbana to be achieved. Do you have any questions? You are able to unmute your mic. If you have any questions or anything to share, we will be discussing the 5 path to awakening because we are almost out of time. We only have 50 minutes, right? Yeah. Um, Don, what do you mean by bodhicitta? You can unmute your mic. Hold on. I'll unmute it for you.
Thank you,
Yes, Don, we
Bhante.
can hear you now.
Thank you, Bhante. This is a fascinating discourse. Why is it you were earlier on referring to bodhicitta and bodhisattva? Why is it that these particular factors are not highlighted or talked too much in the Theravada tradition?
The bodhicittas and the bodhisattvas. Well, within Theravada Buddhism, we do not really talk much about the bodhisattvas if it does not come to, for example, the contents of the Jataka stories, that is the stories with regarding the past life of the Buddha during his time of practice. Because within Theravada Buddhism, we have an esteemed focus upon the result, which is Nibbana. So we tend to usually talk, and I find that in this time that we live in, the attitude is such that we have gone through a time. Where the Jataka was the Dhamma almost, right? I think many of the people who would remember, now Don has not been in Sri Lanka for so many years, right? But I think some of the people who grew up in Sri Lanka with traditional, you know, would know. But Don, you went to Dhamma school in Vajrayana, or no? Yeah, so you might remember you might remember a time when when um, when Jatakas was the Dhamma. There was nothing more than the Jatakas which were taught, right? And it was actually monks such as, for example, um, Venerable Vajrayana, people like Venerable Vajrayana, people like, for example, Renukana Chandabimala, monks like Ananda Metteyya, monks like that, they were the ones who sort of true rebels, the true rebels, I would say, who actually were the start of the consciousness talk, right? Who really bought out the consciousness talk. And then it is now that we are actually seeing the effects of those monks rebelling then, right? And sort of telling, no, there is something more to the Dhamma now, and starting to speak about it. So within Theravada Buddhism, we have at the current mode of time that we live in, we have more connection to the Nibbana aspect right now and consciousness than the past. Now, I rarely hear, I think it is true to say that we rarely hear a talk given on the Jatakas, right? Very, very rare, right? But we hear now it's talk about consciousness over consciousness, right? Consciousness, which is, I think, incredible, And the West is also benefiting. West is also benefiting from these discussion topics, right? Bill, you want to ask a question?
We always hear about this solitude, viveka, right? And about this, like aranya gatova, rukamula gatava, sunnara gatova. But now, so that is a more physical solitude that then goes to, to from that viveka that goes on to viraga and nirodha and patinisagga and vimukti and things. However, I've noticed today and another day when we were doing, I don't know whether it's when you were doing Abhidhamma Sutta, you're now talking the same term viveka more like when you go and let go thoughts and like the solitude of thought. So do you use vivek for both going into a place physically, and then you talk of sort of solitude in terms of releasing thoughts, and are they both used? So those days I had only heard it in terms of like the Ajagga Sutta, or or this Anapanasati Sutta, where you go to a forest or foot of a tree, but you're using it now when you let go of thoughts and the solitude of the mind. Is it used in both the same term,
Yeah.
viveka?
So with regards to viveka, there are two types of viveka. Viveka is translated as solitude, right? There is mental solitude and kai viveka, which is physical solitude, right? Physical solitude brings about mental solitude, right? But hardly happens the other way around, right? Hardly happens the other way around. There are a lot of disruptions and difficulties if it's the other way around. Usually, kai viveka brings about chitta viveka, right? Kai viveka brings about chitta viveka. So that is why the gochara, the Pali word used, gochara bhumi. Gochara is a suitable bhumi, place, which is spoken about. Now, with regards to nibbana, a gochara bhumi could basically be a place which enables one to carry on a practice which is suitable, which could be carry on a practice which is suitable towards the attainment of Dhamma. So living in places that illegal activities are not conducted, living in places where the political systems are soothing to the practice. For example, now if we remember the story of Venerable Mahinda, right? Of Venerable Mahinda and how long Venerable Mahinda waited for the right king to appear in the country so that he would then come to Sri Lanka and start his Dhamma mission. Venerable Mahinda waited a long time. Not for any other reason. He waited until the right situation arose. The right situation arose, right? So you then sort of, again, what do you see? Now, monks of today, or even politically motivated individuals of today might say, oh, we must protect this, this is our country, our heritage, all of this. But you find Venerable Mahinda's attitude specifically, nothing was more important than his nibbana, right? The ability to practice Dhamma and live a moral, virtuous life, nothing exceeded that for him. Meaning, whatever duties, responsibilities he was entrusted with, Nibbana was his primary focus. And to live within that scope of Dhamma with that peace of mind was his primary focus. I think in current society, we have a very unhealthy sacrificial mentality where we sacrifice our morals, our values, what we believe, what we want to believe in, right? We sacrifice these things because we think we ought to do so for the better. But what the Buddha's doctrine says is sacrificing these virtues, beliefs, or rather your values, really, not beliefs, but your values, might sometimes do you good for a short period of time. But in the long period, the long haul, in the long term, it will bring about suffering for yourself and for people who have now come under the influence of that sacrifice, right? That is the teaching of the Buddha with regards to the self-sacrifice that we make, which I think is very important. Now we battle the topics of being selfish sometimes. For example, taking care of yourself, your mental health, with regards to the relationships that you take up. It is said, and very much according to Dhamma also, where you put your mental health before anything else, because this is what enables you to work with a proper mind. Work with a mind that is calm, relaxed in a way that you can focus on doing good, or else we live in a lot of hate, frustration, negativity, right? Hate, frustration, negativity. That is what we find. So with Kai Viveka and Chitta Viveka, Viveka is used in both of those aspects. And it is something that the Buddha says, that we should find ourselves in a suitable atmosphere which will enable our journey towards Nibbana. Up until we find a suitable atmosphere, we will probably keep on sort of falling over, where we have to come up slowly, right? So there's a lot of effort that would then be required of us, but it would be easier if we were able to have have the blessings to have such a environment for ourselves, right? Okay, Samantha, what is the four strivings and the five spiritual powers? So the four strivings, right? The four strivings is, we've spoken of this. This is also referred to as a Dhamma dasa, right? Where we contemplate upon, have unarisen, unwholesome, or here it says, bring forth the desire for restraint of unarisen, bad, wholesome states, right?
Mm-hmm.
We abandon the arisen, bad, wholesome states. We cultivate unarisen, wholesome states, and we guard or maintain unarisen, wholesome states, right? Sambara, Pahana, Bhavana, Anurakkana, right? So this is called the Dhammadasa, a contemplation that is very, very much spoken of within Buddhism, where we are actually asked to do this every single day to sort of keep ourselves on a progressive path towards Nibbana, right? And also, just to add, Samantha, this is also, you find this is the leadership of the Buddha. The Buddha's ability to motivate his disciples in way of pure contemplation towards oneself, which keeps everyone living far and near in check, right? In check. This is the Buddha's leadership qualities. Now we find many people who are leadership coaches and all of that, giving CEOs, managers, right, the idea that the onus of whatever action that is being taken or done within a corporation is given to the employees. Why? Because then they work with higher efficiency, right? And we find that taught by the Buddha in a very much, of course, in a very much supramundane sense, 2,600 years ago. Samantha, do you have anything to ask?
Yeah, what I meant was, Bhante, so we were looking at the part 2 awakening, and then we did the first one with the Satipatthana, and then the second one, I presume there's the efforts, the right efforts, the 4 different types. And so I'm just wondering, so where does the third, the fourth, and the fifth, so we need to, those, what do they come under? We just need to cultivate what it says, is it?
Okay, so we have stopped from the path. We did not go into the path of awakening, Samantha.
Oh, sorry. Okay, sorry.
Yeah,
sorry.
so we are to do the path of awakening next class, because we have to sort of give it all our attention.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. Okay. Thank you,
That's
Bhante.
okay, Samantha. I can hear the eagerness in your voice. All right.
Very interesting.
Yes, Samantha. Thank you. Does anyone else have? Don, do you have anything to share?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Thank you. I have a follow-up to it. Now, in Colchester, you are having fundraising initiatives to raise funds to obtain food and then donate the food to food banks in Colchester, which you have done, and they have shown a great deal of gratitude. So taking that action, does one, in the process of moving towards Nibbana, also, because when you look at what the Buddha said and did, he did a lot of things concerning service to society, which encompasses the rulers as well as the ordinary person, and social, economic, and political matters. Is it not compatible to do both? Isn't it possible to also strive towards the attainment of Nibbana as well as also serve society?
I would say, Don, I would say, with regard to that question, there are levels. There are levels to which, or it all depends on how you're going to do it, of course, right? But very much, it is something that very much is possible. But the question comes down to, will this affect my practice in a way that I might be distracted from it completely, right? Would it come to a level where my practice would be, for example, now, if a part of your service was to do a lot with, let's say, fighting, right? With a lot of fighting, with a lot of war, violence, the Buddha would never condone such an action. He would always try to avoid such endeavors, right? This is to say, because the Buddha's opinion was usually upon things, or to in a way support the spiritual practice leading upwards to Nibbana. So he would not condone anything that would take us away from it. That was not his duty, and that was not what he did. I think the Buddha in this case, with regards to, now we sometimes say, or we read that the Buddha, or we hear that the Buddha supported certain militaries. But this is actually, supported is the wrong word to use. He blessed, may you be safe. He never blessed in a way that said, may you be victorious over the other. Rather, he blessed in a way to say, may you be safe, may you be protected from harm, right? Those were the blessings that were bestowed upon these militaries and armies that were going into war. The Buddha never condoned actions which would take one away from Nibbana at any cost. Because what the Buddha says is, in terms of Nibbana, it is not worth it. But when you take figures such as, for example, Vishaka, when you take other figures such as Anathapindika, King Kosala, Bimbisara, Ajatasattu, all these people, including Venerable Sariputta and Moggallana, were very political figures, we find, within the Sangha and within the devotees of the Buddha. They were political figures in a way. Why? Because they had a lot of say as to how Buddhism was represented. Also, you find, for example, Vishaka comes to the Buddha at one point to complain about the prices of taxes in one sutta, right? To complain about the price of taxes in one sutta. So you find that this enlightened being, Vishaka, was very much active character within the city that she used to live in. And they also used to manage a lot of businesses, right? They used to manage a lot of businesses, right? They were very, very, very wealthy families, wealthy beyond our imagination with the amount of wealth that they had. Obviously, they had many duties. We can do it. It seems that there is a way that we are able to do it, but it requires a lot of Dhammic patience, Dhammic understanding, I would say, and a pure attraction to the Dhamma, right? Pure attraction to the Dhamma, to what the Dhamma truly is, not the cultural aspects of it, right? Now, for example, within Sri Lanka, we know that we have a thought, we think that if we are to offer the Buddha Puja, we cannot stop it, right? That we cannot stop it. People are very afraid of this in Sri Lanka. To not keep the Buddha Puja, right? If they have been keeping the Buddha Puja. And this is complete and completely against what the Buddha has taught, right? Now, beliefs such as those create suffering and difficulty in our life, right? But here, that is why now you see now Sakuludayi mentioned 5 things that he thinks the Buddha is respected for. But the Buddha, when he spoke about the true qualities that he is respected for, what did he speak of? He spoke of the mental achievements. He spoke about the Dhamma. He spoke about wisdom leading to Nibbana. That is the true focus of our practice, nothing else. And when one is able to truly focus on those parts, life becomes easier, I feel. Life becomes easier because now you're not sort of indoctrinated or rather dogmatic with regard to the way that you live your life as a Buddhist. You're more realistic, practical, and you have a problem solving mechanism within you using the Dhamma, right? So activism and all of these practices are very much a part and parcel, very much a part and parcel of life. Also, for example, now dana is very much something that the Buddha has encouraged practicing even as a monk. Even as a monk. Now, for example, I do not know if you've heard about the Saraniya Vata, right? Probably not, right? Now, there is something that we do now. It's a practice of dana, right? Now, what is done is when a monk goes on alms, the ancient way that it was practiced is when a monk goes on alms, he receives this alms food, doesn't he? This alms food, the monk would bring back to the refectory or the area where the monks would consume their food, and he would leave it for the rest of the Sangha. He would offer it to the rest of the Sangha. He would leave it, thinking, may this be my offering to the rest of the Sangha. And he leaves it on a table or platform, whatever. And the monks, they would serve themselves, right? Obviously, they are aware of this is a part of the Saraniya or this monk's offering, so they will probably be more sort of cautious that the monk has enough food. But the monks or the Sangha is able to take however much scoops of rice or food from the bowl, right? And the monk who offers is able to eat this, the remaining of the meal after the monks have taken. Now you see what is that? That is dana, right? You see monks too practicing dana. Now when I was at both Pauk and Nauena, which is Sri Lanka's largest forest monastery, something that now specifically in Nauena, something that we would do is after we would go for alms or we were served our lunch, we would come up and we would sort of serve into the tray with the hole in the hole in the containers to be offered to the Buddha. So all the monks would serve out of their alms bowl to the Buddha puja, or what we call the offering there where we offer the food to the Buddha. And then we would all spoon a little amount of whatever, rice or curry or whatnot, to another monk's bowl, and we would serve each and every senior and young monk. Now, this whole offering would take about 20 minutes or 15 to 20 minutes, right? But this is something that we do. Now, that is to say that this dana is very much a part. Now, even me offering this dana to you in terms of Dhamma knowledge, the classes, the meditations, this is also very much part of social activism in a way that we are conducting here. But of course, there comes a time when we must question the suitability of it. So we question, where does it become not all right? There the Buddha answers, when it hinders your practice, when it brings disrespect to yourself and the brethren, right? This is where you do not engage. Because why? You are affecting yourself as well as the rest of the Sangha, right? Yourself and the rest of the Sangha, right? Don, I hope. Yeah, thank you, Don. Any other questions that anyone would have? All right. So if there are no other questions, right, we will continue the sutta. We will continue the sutta next week. So up until then, I wish you all the very best. I will see you again very soon. And I wish you all the very best. And I hope you have a very nice evening. Take care. to all of you. Right? Good night.